Welcome to the 7th episode of this video essay. In this video we are going to look into some essential facts relating to the history and presence of modern sciences. Firstly, I want to emphasize that when I use the concept modern sciences, I draw the line to the 17th century, this period, which came after the end of the period or era of Renaissance. As much as you can say that the works of alchemists, Galileo Galilei, Kepler, were important in the history that led to the birth of modern sciences, I insist on drawing the line to the works of René Descartes and Francis Bacon, which puts us to the mark of the 17th century. The reason being for this decision is that Descartes, alongside with Leibniz, outlined the mathematical principles for modern scientific theoretical thinking, and Francis Bacon on his own part outlined the basic rules of doing proper modern natural sciences. Because in his writings he emphasized the importance of drawing data from repeatable experimental situations. And if all this seems a little bit too abstract to you, let me just try to make this as simple and as understandable as possible for those who don't know what's behind the work of these two philosophers. The work of Descartes was essential if we want to understand the theoretical side of sciences. Everyone knows the famous equation E equals mc squared. But few are aware that any theoretical representation inside the physics relies on the mathematical principles, the basic mathematical principles which were most completely outlined by Descartes and, like I said, Leibniz. And in order to understand the experimental side of natural sciences, it's worth considering that the scientific laboratories that we now see in our world, they just didn't drop from the heaven, drop from the sky, out of nowhere. All these laboratories, or the necessity of creating laboratory conditions, rose out of necessity of creating repeatable and therefore reliable conditions for scientific experiments. And if this, let me give you an example that actually dates back to the period, I think it was maybe the 17th century or 18th century. Let's say that you want to study how the speed at which a marble hits a surface. You want to study how the speed affects the depth of the impact hole. Now, in order for you to do this kind of experimental study, you need to make sure, first of all, that the marbles that you use to shoot at a different speed, they are, of course, all the same weight. But you also have to make sure that, if the marbles hit, let's say that they hit a surface of wet clay, you have to make sure that the wet clay is homogeneous. You get it from the same place, and make sure that the density of the clay is the same, that it doesn't vary. So this is an example of doing empirical studies on natural phenomena. You have to have experimental conditions that are homogeneous. They are always of the same. And creating these repeatable, homogeneous conditions is very much part and parcel of the modern natural sciences. Hence, the birth of modern laboratories, whether they are physics laboratories or laboratories of chemistry. It's very much part and parcel of and we wouldn't have those things if, had there not been a person like Francis Bacon, we wouldn't have these laboratories, because he emphasized the importance of creating sound experimental conditions for the study of natural phenomena. Let's now go through the timeline of birth of different modern natural sciences. The first stop, of course, in this repeating the history, the first stop, of course, is Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton, which was published 1687, which basically outlined the fundamentals for what later became modern physics. The second noticeable event in the history of sciences is the work by Antoine Lavoisier, Très élémentaire de chimie, which was published 1789, which was almost exactly 100 years later than Principia Mathematica. This is considered to be the first complete workbook of what now is called modern chemistry. In the case of the birth of modern geology, it usually is related to a Scotsman, James Hutton. His book Theory of Earth was published 1788, and it laid the basis for the principles of modern geology. With biology, we almost have to wait a century more for a proper scientific treatise to emerge. And this, of course, was the famous Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, which was published 1857. Now, going through the list of these key figures and key publications is essential. But as impressive and remarkable these scientific achievements are, I actually in this connection want to emphasize something a bit different. And the thing that I want us to focus is that as much as these achievements were appreciated in a very selected group of people, usually very well educated, well-read people, nevertheless the kind of like reputation or fame or prestige that these people gained was very limited. And what I mean by this one is that great parts of society didn't know a thing about what was happening inside these sciences. So the big parts of population were not affected in any way by these research findings. I would say that these people were the nerds of their own time. the kind of prestige they gained was pretty much within the confines of the circles, social circles and societies of like-minded people. The rest of the society was, just sleeping through these events, if you could say, if you could use that kind of phrase. And also, another thing that I would like to mention is also that also in most of these cases, universities didn't have any role, or they had very marginal role, because during the time when these sciences first started to develop, there was still so much influence of churches, and especially Catholic church within the whole of the European university network. Scientific knowledge as something that produces widely spread technological innovations, which means that they have genuine effect to the lives of the whole population of the country. That kind of thing is historically a relatively young phenomenon. Science is as something that really causes an effect in society through technological advancements, would only start to emerge as a major societal force at the last quarter of the 19th century. And if you really zoom more closely into this, I would say that the general public started to get the blessings of these new technologies only at the later part of the 19th century. I would say from 1890 to 1910. So science is as a major force of societal innovation or advancement. They have only been around 125 years to 150 years, depending on how you count, depending on what you take as a societal impact. And yet, after becoming more after becoming major societal player in terms of impact, science has crossed the threshold of public attention only with difficulty and mostly with bittersweet histories when actually engaging with the rest of the society. Whether it was the development of nuclear bomb at the end of the Second World War, or climate crisis emergency, or involvement with a global pandemic, which is the most recent example. All of these stories can be seen as examples of uneasy, clunky, hard to translate to political or societal arena connections. So there's always been this sort of tangent of a friction. It's only a tangent, and it has weird friction when it comes to the sciences, the university communities, and the rest of the society, especially with politics and politicians. Well, here, of course, I can hear objections. Is that what about the environmental movement, political movement, and which later in the West became the global network of green parties? I do not deny that the green movement and green parties is exception in this respect. It certainly is an exception in the map of political parties, because these parties do not fit to the old scheme of thinking politically. And before we go any further, I also want to emphasize that in a way, in this question, I'm also partial in that respect, that I have had my involvement with Green Party. I was never a member of Finnish Green Party, but I do remember being involved in a campaign of getting a local candidate to Finnish Parliament from the Green Party, and we were actually successful in our attempt. So I have had my involvement, and I want to put it out there because I want to be transparent about my own history. I think the problem for Green parties globally is that very few of them are able to present themselves as general parties, but parties that successfully extend themselves to other parts of the societal life and political life than issues that directly relate to environment and sustainability of our life, of human societies. And here I also want to emphasize that I can't even remember the person anymore, but remember talking with a person who knew more about Green parties on European scale, and how Finnish Green Party fitted into that scheme. And that person said that Finnish Green Party on that larger group of parties has always stood out as the kind of Green Party that tries to expand from its core issues to also other issues that are relevant for society, and hence becoming more like a mainstream party. But in average, I would say that this starting point of environment and sustainability, which are absolutely essential, I'm not denying that, but it has acted against these parties and to a certain degree prevented them to break free from their core issue premises to more of the mainstream of the parties. But I also think that Green parties as a political movement have something that acts as a precedent with regards to our future as democracies. Because Green parties have proven that it's possible to have a party that is based on science-backed political ethos that relies on scientific findings. Now, what would explain this fact that science has had this uneasy relationship with political life, mainly? Let's just start with potential objections, the normal objections that people say. That there is this objection. Scientists should be mainly focused on what they do the best, and that is sciences. But I do not think that this is a fair assessment of anyone who is involved with scientific communities. During my personal involvement with university world, I met numerous researchers having discussions with these people. I found out over and over again that after becoming experts in their fields of study, they came to conclusions that could be easily translated to policy statements in any party platform. But when they approached different parties, they soon found out that there is too much resistance from the ideologies, from the lobbyists, think tanks, party members, party leaders. And that this resistance was just too persistent. So they kind of gave up. For me, the idea that scientists should just focus on doing science is This is a misinterpretation of the Humboldtian idea of what universities should be, because when Humboldt outlined the idea of universities having academic freedom, what he suggested was independence of universities and researchers from the outside influence of governments or economic constraints. But I do not think he never ever suggested that scientists should be sort of like moderate or careful about expressing their opinions with regards to certain policies. That was never suggested by him. And indeed, there is nothing that prevents the scientific communities to have more influence in the policy-making processes, except, of course, self-imposed limitations, or limitations imposed upon them by other political actors who might have their own interests. And I would also say that there is nothing preventing us from having a political party with party agenda and policy statements that are actually based on actual scientific data, unadulated, not being, whitewashed or whatever by other actors, just what comes from science. The other thing that I would like to point out here is that if and when it is true that science, though it's a major force, a powerful force, and it's still marginalized to a degree, if indeed this is true, there are clear symptoms showing it to us. And one of the things that I would like to bring here is more of a cultural thing, because this is a symptom, and this is somehow shown in our cultural consciousness. And what I'm talking about here is that there seems to be a certain kind of cultural discourse that shows itself in different forms of fiction, novels, and film scripts, mainly in popular culture. And what I refer here to is a form of fiction that for me is symptomatic of the marginalized position of sciences in regards to political life. And these are the examples of a genre which could be maybe named or labeled scientific moralities or scientific warning stories. And all these stories relate to scientific advancements as something that has gone unchecked. And when it has gone unchecked, something terrible happens, which is basically under the radar of any kind of human decency. And when it's like that, it of course causes chaos and destruction. So there are these stories in the popular culture that are constantly being reimagined, circulated with different, inside different films and fiction. And these are the stories that relate to scientists doing crazy things with no consideration to the costs, human cost, the kind of consequences that their research might have for the rest of the human society. These kinds of stories, the fact that they are constantly being percolated, constantly played in the record play of our collective consciousness, for me it is an indication that science, as we know, hasn't got enough checks and balances to moderate its potentially harmful influence to the rest of human society, to human societies. So my final conclusion is that sciences are not currently integrated to the rest of the society and to political life the way that they perhaps ought to be integrated, and nothing prevents us from acting in a way that this situation could be changed. But I stop here. This is enough for this episode. Let's go a little bit into what I'm going to do in the next episode. And in order for you to understand what I try to do in the next episode, maybe we have to go back to the previous episode, episode 6, because in that episode I came to the conclusion that the pseudosciences of communism and fascism are not just to a large degree unchecked and therefore dangerous unconscious realms of Western democracies. The role that they have is even more fundamental, especially if you try to understand what really makes modern democracies. The startling conclusion of that episode was that these pseudosciences actually form the logos of modern democracies. They are the implicit fundamental meaning structure at the core of this historical and cultural construct. And what's even more disturbing with this image or this realization is that this particular logos is based more on what brings confusion and discord and chaos than on what actually brings clarity in bringing things together when it brings things together. So the task of the next episode is to explain why sciences are the best candidate to counter this coming together under the reign of confusion, chaos and destructiveness at the core of Western democracy. To put it in more direct terms, if science-based policies are the best antidote against democratic erosion, what explains this? What in the essence of science makes it the best medicine to counter these tendencies of confusion, chaos and destructiveness? But we'll talk about that more in the next episode. If you like this episode and if you like what I'm trying to achieve here, please once again press that like button and or subscribe button. That's all for today, and I see you in the next episode. Have a nice day wherever you are in the world. I see you in the next one.